Welcome to Warfare Codex. If you enjoy fascinating and unusual history, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more incredible stories. Now, let's dive into the strange and extraordinary world of history's most unique individuals. The seeds of World War II were sown not in gunfire, but in silence, in the humiliating terms of the Treaty of Versailles, in the global economic collapse of the 1930s, and in the rise of totalitarian ideologies that promised glory in exchange for obedience. In 1933, Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. Within months, he transformed the Weimar Republic into a dictatorship. Hitler withdrew Germany from the League of Nations, denounced the Treaty of Versailles, and began rearming the country. The world watched, uneasy, but did nothing. Meanwhile, Italy, under Benito Mussolini, invaded Ethiopia in 1935. The League of Nations condemned the action, but no meaningful sanctions followed. In 1936, Germany remilitarized the Rhineland. Again, no response. Emboldened, Hitler and Mussolini drew closer, forming the Rome-Berlin axis. That same year, Spain descended into civil war. Fascist General Francisco Franco, supported by German and Italian forces, battled the elected Republican government, which received help from Soviet advisors and international volunteers. Spain became a bloody rehearsal for the global conflict to come. In 1937, Japan launched a full-scale invasion of China. The atrocities committed, most infamously the Nanjing Massacre, shocked the world. Yet the West remained focused on its own recovery. As authoritarian regimes expanded, democratic nations hesitated. By 1938, Hitler turned his attention to Austria. With little resistance, German troops annexed it in the Anschluss. Soon after, he demanded the Sudetenland, a German-speaking region of Czechoslovakia. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, eager to avoid war, traveled to Munich. There, he and other European leaders handed over the territory in the name of peace. Hitler promised he had no further ambitions. It was a lie. In March 1939, Hitler seized the rest of Czechoslovakia. A few months later, in a stunning twist, Germany signed a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union. Stalin and Hitler, ideological enemies, now temporary allies. Secret clauses divided Eastern Europe between them. On September 1, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. Blitzkrieg, lightning war, overwhelmed Polish defenses. Tanks, planes, and infantry moved with terrifying speed. On September 17th, Soviet forces invaded from the east. Poland was crushed within weeks. Britain and France declared war, but they were unprepared. While German forces moved swiftly, the West stood still. The so-called phony war set in, months of inaction on the Western Front. That changed in April 1940. Germany invaded Denmark and Norway. Then, in May, they unleashed blitzkrieg on France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. The German panzers bypassed the Maginot Line and tore through the Ardennes. In just 6 weeks, France fell. Paris was occupied. The British barely escaped at Dunkirk, leaving behind thousands of vehicles and weapons. Hitler now ruled Western Europe, but Britain, under Winston Churchill's defiant leadership, refused to surrender. In the summer of 1940, the Battle of Britain began. German bombers filled the skies. London burned. But the Royal Air Force held firm. Radar, resilience, and sheer courage turned the tide. For the first time, Hitler was denied victory. Elsewhere, Italy joined the war, attacking British positions in North Africa and Greece. But Mussolini's forces were weak. Germany was forced to intervene, conquering Yugoslavia and Greece by April 1941. In the east, Stalin annexed the Baltic states and fought a brutal winter war against Finland. Despite heavy Soviet losses, Finland remained sovereign. Then, on June 22, 1941, Hitler made his most reckless gamble, Operation Barbarossa. Over 3 million Axis troops invaded the Soviet Union. Cities like Minsk, Smolensk, and Kiev fell quickly, but the Red Army, though devastated, did not collapse. Soviet resistance hardened. Scorched earth tactics and the vastness of the Russian terrain slowed the German advance. By autumn, German forces approached Moscow. But the Russian winter came early and brutally. Ill-equipped and exhausted, the Wehrmacht faltered. At the end of 1941, the world held its breath. But it didn't yet know that the war was about to become truly global. On the morning of December 7, 1941, the war changed forever. Japanese aircraft roared over the Pacific, descending on the American naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Battleships exploded. Aircraft carriers were spared only because they weren't in port. Over 2,400 Americans were killed. The United States, long neutral, now entered the war with fury. Japan didn't stop there. Within days, it struck across Southeast Asia, Hong Kong, Malaya, the Philippines, Burma, Indonesia. One after another, colonial outposts fell like dominoes. The Japanese Empire spread like wildfire, fast, brutal, and unstoppable. In early 1942, Singapore, the so-called Gibraltar of the East, surrendered. It was Britain's greatest military defeat. In the Philippines, American and Filipino troops fought heroically, but were overwhelmed. Survivors endured the horrific Bataan Death March, but the tide would not stay in Japan's favor for long. In June 1942, the Battle of Midway became a turning point. The U.S. Navy, using intelligence to anticipate Japan's moves, sank 4 aircraft carriers. It was a staggering blow to Japan's naval strength, one it would never fully recover from. Meanwhile, the Axis continued its advance in Europe and North Africa. In the Soviet Union, German forces regrouped after the failed assault on Moscow. In summer 1942, Hitler launched Case Blue, an offensive aimed at the oil fields of the Caucasus. But the true prize was the city of Stalingrad. What followed was one of the bloodiest battles in human history. From August 1942 to February 1943, German and Soviet troops fought for every street, building, and room in the ruined city. Temperatures dropped below freezing. Supplies ran low, but the Soviets, under General Zhukov, encircled the German Sixth Army. Hitler refused to allow a retreat. Over 300,000 Axis soldiers were trapped. In February, they surrendered. Stalingrad was a turning point. It shattered the myth of German invincibility. In North Africa, British forces under General Montgomery clashed with the formidable Afrika Korps, led by Erwin Rommel. At El Alamein in October 1942, the Allies finally halted the Axis advance. Churchill would later say, "It is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end, but it is, perhaps, the end of the beginning." At the same time, the United States launched Operation Torch, its first major offensive in the European theater, landing troops in Morocco and Algeria. Together with British forces, they began driving Axis forces out of Africa. Back in the Pacific, the Allies began a new kind of warfare, island hopping. On Guadalcanal, American Marines fought a brutal 6-month campaign to deny Japan a strategic foothold. The jungle, the disease, and the tenacity of the Japanese defenders turned each island into a blood-soaked battlefield. On the home fronts, entire nations mobilized for total war. Factories retooled. Women entered the workforce in massive numbers. Rationing became a way of life. Propaganda fueled morale and demonized the enemy. By the end of 1943, the tide had turned. Germany was on the defensive in the east. Japan was losing ground in the Pacific. Italy, once a proud Axis partner, was beginning to unravel. But the war was far from over. Cities would still burn, millions would still die, and the most horrific chapters were yet to be written. By early 1944, the Allies were preparing for their most ambitious operation yet, a direct strike into Western Europe. The Germans knew an invasion was coming, but not when or where. Hitler believed the attack would land near Calais. He was wrong. On June 6, 1944, D-Day, over 150,000 Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy in the largest amphibious invasion in history. Under the cover of darkness, paratroopers landed behind enemy lines. At dawn, waves of soldiers hit the sand. Omaha, Utah, Gold, Juno, Sword. The fighting was fierce, the casualties high, but the beachheads held. Within weeks, the Allies broke through German lines and liberated Paris in August. France was free. Meanwhile, in the east, the Soviet Union unleashed Operation Bagration, a colossal offensive that obliterated Germany's Army Group Center. Soviet troops surged westward, liberating Minsk, Warsaw, and reaching the gates of Berlin by early 1945. But Hitler refused to surrender. In December 1944, he launched a surprise counterattack in the Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge. American forces, caught off guard, held firm in bitter cold and brutal combat. After weeks of fighting, the German offensive collapsed. The Reich was crumbling. In Italy, Allied troops pushed north, battling German defenders in mountainous terrain. Rome had fallen in 1944, and by spring of 1945, the campaign neared its end. Mussolini was captured and executed by Italian partisans. His corpse hung in a public square. His reign ended in disgrace. Back in Germany, cities lay in ruins. The Allies bombed industrial centers, crippling Nazi war production. Dresden burned. Hamburg was shattered. Millions of civilians fled westward, desperate to escape the advancing Red Army. In April 1945, Soviet and American troops met at the Elbe River. Berlin was surrounded. Inside his bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery, Adolf Hitler raged against reality. On April 30th, as Soviet troops closed in, he took his own life. Within days, Nazi Germany surrendered unconditionally. The war in Europe was over, but the Pacific still burned. The United States had captured Iwo Jima and Okinawa at staggering cost. Every inch of ground was contested. Kamikaze pilots crashed their planes into American ships. Japanese soldiers fought to the last man. It was clear an invasion of Japan would be catastrophic. Then, in August 1945, the world changed forever. On August 6th, the U.S. dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. 3 days later, a second bomb fell on Nagasaki. The destruction was beyond comprehension. Hundreds of thousands died, instantly or from radiation in the weeks that followed. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender. The war was finally over. More than 70 million people had died. Cities were gone, borders were redrawn. The Holocaust had exposed humanity's darkest depths. Yet, out of the ruins, new powers emerged. The United States and the Soviet Union, former allies, now stared at each other as rivals in a new conflict, the Cold War. World War II had ended, but the world it left behind would never be the same. Thanks for watching Warfare Codex. If you enjoyed this journey into history's strangest figures, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more amazing stories. See you in the next one.